This is the Louie T Network. You are now officially in the lab room. It's that time again. It's that time again to go hard in the off season, cause we trying to win. We gon' go so hard, we don't take no days off. Hopefully one day it's all gonna pay off.
Hey yo, who else could it be? Me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to the 2017 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series, where your man Louie T aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2017 NFL Draft using our baseball graded scale, single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series, so we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out. And I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, get an aggregate score for all players selected, divide by the number of picks, which will then yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer out there, are in total control, as this is the You Pick format, or as I like to call it, the Up format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in this and future videos in this series in the comment section saying two things: the phrase next and the team you'd like to see next. Some examples: Broncos next, Denver next, next Denver, next Broncos. You don't want to be too wordy. Again, very competitive process. Only one person is going to allow the next team in the series to be chosen. So again, you don't want to go too elaborate. You don't want to go Denver Broncos next. It's too long. You want to be efficient. You want to be first. So with that being said, next team up in the series is none other than the Denver Broncos, a team that just 2 seasons ago hoisted the Lombardi. Last year, a little bit of a struggle at the quarterback position. That's something they're going to have to iron out. But look, this defense is still legit. You lose a couple pieces. I think this is a draft where you add a couple of pieces. You get better up front. I think this is a draft where you're going to look at, and if these players pan out, look, John Elway just got a 5-year extension to be the Denver Broncos general manager because he's done a phenomenal job. I don't know if there's a general manager in the league that's done a better job of acquiring talented football players, whether it be a free agency or the draft, and bringing them together and keeping that thing together in Denver than John Elway. And so I think this is another draft where I say hats off to John Elway for getting it done at a very high level. Let's jump into this draft as we start in the first round, 20th overall selection. Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles is the selection. And this is a guy that initially, when the Broncos made this selection, I was kind of confused because I didn't think he was the best tackle available in this draft. Remember, this was a weak tackle draft class, and you look at the stock of tackles, and he was the first tackle taken in this draft was Garrett Bowles. And I kind of scratched my head because I thought Ryan Ramczyk was better suited to be ready to go day one. But when I looked at the two players a little bit closer, I think the Broncos may have gotten it right. One thing's for sure, Ryan Ramczyk may never be a left tackle in this league. He was drafted by the Saints with the final pick of the first round. Garrett Bowles has everything you need to be a left tackle in this league, and we're going to talk about him. Speaking of which, we start with his size and length. 34-inch arms to go with that 6'5" frame. This guy has the requisite size to be an NFL left tackle. And when you draft a guy in the first round, generally speaking, you're looking for a left tackle. You may be looking for a right tackle. In today's NFL, you can't hide a right tackle. You need both your left and right tackles to be rock solid guys for you. But the Broncos need a left tackle. They've been fishing and they've been searching for that guy. They've had some rough patches with some injuries to some guys that they've went out and acquired over the years. And so they're looking for a guy to come in and be a stalwart at the left tackle position. And they think Garrett Bowles is that guy, and he's got the size and length, 34-inch arms, with that 6'5" frame to really give them the guy that could hold it down for them at the left tackle position. Athleticism, by far and away, he was the best athlete at the combine from an offensive lineman standpoint. Now, Ryan Ramczyk was nursing an injury. He did not perform at the combine, but it doesn't matter. He's nowhere near the athlete Garrett Bowles is. I would even take a step further and say, remember that that classic 2014 draft for offensive linemen. Now, Greg Robinson turned out to be a bust, but he was a tremendous athlete as an offensive lineman. Remember, that was a draft that gave us Jake Matthews, that gave us Taylor Lewan. All of these guys were exceptional athletes. And you look at what Garrett Bowles put forth at the combine, he would have fit right in with those guys in terms of athleticism. 4.9, 540, the broad jump, the 3-cone, the 20-yard shuttle, all were best at the combine among offensive linemen, and he was exceptional. I thought he put a show on in terms of athletic display. And so you see that on tape. This is something that transfers onto the game field as this guy moves around with ease. He makes it look easy out on the field. He's got a nasty disposition. That's the next pro. Again, it's not a prerequisite, but you'll love your offensive lineman to be a little bit nasty and rough around the edges. Again, I always reference this. In the trenches is where it's the most physical in football. We always talk about receivers and corners, and those are guys chirping all the time because they're not in the trenches. You got to be physical. You got to be nasty. And it always helps if you've got a little bit of extra juice in the tank when it comes to being physical. He has that for sure. Outstanding movement skills. I've already talked about that, but let's go ahead and couple the next 3 pros together because it all ties into great movement skills. His feet glide in pass sets. I mean, he gets out of his stance effortlessly. He's able to really set, and that's why speed rushers don't give him as much problems. He struggles more so to the inside and with bull rushes, and we'll talk about why potentially a little bit later on. But the speed guys really don't give him as much of a problem because he moves so well. He gets to the second level with ease, and when he does, he attacks guys aggressively. He gets to the second level and then he destroys. He's a seek and destroy second level blocker. I absolutely love that. If you want to see Garrett Bowles at its best in the run game, getting to the second level, seeking and destroying, look, put on any tape you want from Joe Williams late in the season when he came back and joined that Utah football team. The one game I would tell you to go look at when Joe Williams had an absolute field day is the game versus UCLA, where he might have rushed for damn near 400 yards. Every time you look, he was busting off a big run, and a lot of them were behind big number 72, whether he was pulling or he was just absolutely mauling somebody at the line of scrimmage. Nonetheless, he was outstanding. There's one play where he pulls from the tackle position. He's the second guy in. That linebacker was so helpless. He smashes him, and Joe Williams takes off of that block, gets to the next wave of defenders, and outruns all of them to the end zone. So he's outstanding in terms of athleticism and movement, and all of those things translates to being a left tackle at the next level. And then there's upside, and I'm not going to go too much into the upside because we're going to talk about that when we get to his cons, but I will say this, there is room for growth with a guy like Garrett Bowles, and that's part of the reason why a lot of teams weren't comfortable making the selection a little bit sooner because they think that he's got a lot of growth left in him, which is a good thing, but it's also something that is going to maybe stunt his growth in terms of being ready right away and stepping right in and being an effective left tackle in this league. We've seen guys get drafted in the first round, not start off as a left tackle, maybe start on the right side, maybe start at guard. Even as early as last year, we saw with the Ole Miss offensive lineman, Laramie Tunzel, who fell down draft boards because of his transgressions right before the draft and ended up playing guard, and now he's going to get an opportunity to go to left tackle. So we've seen teams be creative in ways to kind of hold off a guy that may not be ready to play the position yet. We'll see what happens with Garrett Bowles, but there's upside. And the best of Garrett Bowles is yet to come, and that's why I think the Broncos felt very comfortable spending a first-round pick on him. As we get to his cons, the first thing that I noticed is that he's 297 pounds, and on tape, you can tell that he's 297 pounds. Now, I don't know if he puts on 15 pounds of mass and gets to about 312 pounds or so, if that will limit the athleticism, because you don't want to take that away from him right now. That's one of his biggest assets, but he does need to get physically stronger. He does need to bulk up, and I think the Broncos are going to put him in their nutrition and weight training program. Obviously, he's going to put on weight. He's going to be north of 300 pounds when it's all said and done, and we'll see how he handles himself then. I think that's something that went kind of under the radar, but that's something that's going to help him improve and anchor down better. I think sometimes he can be a little high in his pass sets, and guys get up under his pads, and he's not strong enough. He's not bulky enough to sit down and anchor down, and you'll see him get driven back from time to time. And gives way to power at times. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with him just needing to bulk up. I think you kill two birds with one stone. If you bulk him up, I don't think you'll have him having an issue with bull rushes as often as you saw with him at Utah, struggling with that. So I think if he bulks up, he won't give way to power as often. And then finally, he just needs some fine tuning. He's a little rough around the edges. Remember, this is a guy that only started at Utah for 1 year. He went to community college. He had a very troubled upbringing. He was a guy that was finding himself into a lot of different things that weren't conducive to him being successful as a young adult. And then he had a child. It changed his life. He started to get on the right path. And all of a sudden now, he's a guy that shot onto the college football landscape, 1 year of production, but because of only having 1 year at a major Power 5 conference school, you get a guy that has some issues with angles. I think he struggles with angles, and when he takes poor angles, he starts to grab. So you get a guy that his hands aren't in the right position. His pad level isn't always where it needs to be. So you get a guy that has some inconsistencies in his game, and he'll overrun some angles. He'll underrun. A lot of times he'll run to where a guy is instead of to where he needs to go to block that guy. He can make any reach block there is. He's that athletic, but he'll run to the guy instead of where that guy is going and projecting where he needs to meet him to win. And so you'll see him getting in a position where he has to reach, lunge, grab, and that's where you get yourself into trouble. So if you coach this guy up, you probably could easily have yourself a first-round linchpin left tackle for the next decade. In the first round, 20th overall selection, Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles. He's hit off. He's hit deep. Out of hit. It's a home run for the Denver Broncos in the first round with offensive lineman Garrett Bowles. This is a Broncos offense that struggled to run the football a season ago. At times, they struggled to protect the quarterback. These are things that you have to shore up if you want to be in a better offensive football team. This is the first step in doing so. Love this selection out of the gate for John Elway in the Denver Broncos in the 2017 NFL Draft. If we move on to their second round pick, I love this selection just as much as the first. 51st overall selection, Florida State edge rusher DeMarcus Walker is the selection. You lose one DeMarcus in DeMarcus Ware, you gain another in DeMarcus Walker. And I think this is one of the most unheralded picks in this entire draft. I know I'm guilty. I can't speak for anybody else out there, but I know I'm guilty of underselling this man's value in this draft and what he brings to the table as a pass rusher. He's a very unique study and case. You don't see a lot of guys doing what he did at the collegiate level. And that's why I'm so in love with this selection. We talk about the Broncos defensively and why they're so good. It's guys like DeMarcus Walker who go under the radar, who help them stay afloat defensively as one of the league's best. And let's talk about him. Size and length. You're talking about a 6'4", 280-pound man with 33-inch arms. This is a guy that can get it done. Athleticism, 4.76. He's not the greatest athlete, but he can run. That 4.76 is proof. We're talking about a 280-pound individual, folks. This is a man that can move for his size, carries that weight very well. Quickness. I think this is his biggest attribute to date, is his quickness. He's got a beautiful swim move where he swims over, jumps along with that swim move. So it's a hop step, a swim, and he's in the backfield, whether he's chasing the quarterback or going after the running back. That swim move coupled with that jump hop step is something that if you want to see him at his best, all you got to do is turn on the first game of the season versus Ole Miss and watch him take over that ball game. 4.5 sacks in that game. And it was basically with the same move, that swim, jump, rip, and he's in the backfield. And this guy's got some super strong hands, which is the next pro. He backs quarterbacks, okay? 25 sacks in the last 2 seasons, including 16.5 sacks last year. So this guy getting it done at a very high level, or it might have been more like 15.5. But in any event, he had a ton of sacks last season. He's getting it done at a very high clip. And this is a guy that has strong hands. You don't generally see defensive linemen, edge rushers, or whoever it may be, get their hands on the quarterback and yank him down only with grips and grabs of the jersey. A lot of guys, they don't get their whole body around the quarterback, arms, and wrap them up. They don't get the quarterback on the ground. This is one of those guys. He gets his hands on you. Most likely, you're not going to escape his grasp. He's stout at the point of attack. He stacks and sheds in the run game. So he's a guy that can play all 3 downs. You can move him around. Speaking of which, he's got versatility. At Florida State, they would play him outside. They would kick him inside on obvious pass downs, and he would win because he's so quick. He would beat centers. He would beat guards. He would split double teams. He's a menace inside. I like him better as an interior pass rusher than I do on the outside because I don't think he's as explosive, doesn't have the type of bend you need to be explosive. That's why you have Shane Ray. That's why you've got who I deem the best pass rusher in all of football, Von Miller, and why you have guys like Shaquille Barrett coming off the bench. You've got more than enough guys off the edge. It's guys like him, couple him with Derek Wolfe inside. All of a sudden now, you're going to have guys that can get you the pressure that you had in 2015 when you had Malik inside getting pressure along with Garrett Wolfe. So all of a sudden now, this is a guy that I think can come in and be that kind of Malik Jackson impact player for you inside. Love what he brings to the table. And then finally, he's got a high football IQ. If he's not getting to the quarterback, he does a great job of just kind of sitting, reading the quarterback's eyes, and getting his hands up and getting deflections. He was one of the best in college football of knocking the football down. And look, a lot of times we talk about pressure. We talk about a guy's ability to get to the quarterback. Deflections are just as deflating as getting to the quarterback, but not sacking him, but interrupting his timing and rhythm on a play and forcing him to throw it a little bit quicker. Deflections, they serve as a wasted down. And if on 3rd and 7, you're not getting to the quarterback, but you get your hands up and you knock the football down, guess what? That team has to punt. It's just as good as an incompletion. It is, in fact, an incompletion. So, and sometimes those batted balls turn into interceptions. Love the fact that he's smart enough to know, okay, I'm not going to get it there this time. Maybe I'm even tired. Okay, this is a chance for me to kind of get a second win, but while I'm doing it, still be productive. High football IQ for DeMarcus Walker. As we go to his cons, he's not explosive. All right. He's not a dynamic rusher off the edge. Again, that's why you have guys like that. I think where his best value will be met is when you kick him inside. Look, he's still a 3-down player. All right. He's still going to give you some production on 1st and 2nd downs. But I think where his value is going to be best met is where you go into your nickel sets and you're looking to get as many pass rushers on the field. You can kick this guy inside and he'll be a menace getting to the quarterback along with Derek Wolfe on the inside while you still got Von Miller and fill in the blank on the other side, whether it's Shane Ray or Shaquille Barrett going after the quarterback. You got to love that combination. I think you're going to have one of the better pass rushing packages in all of football because of a guy like DeMarcus Walker being added to the mix. But he's not an explosive guy, so putting him outside, not going to be as ideal because I don't think he's as explosive, nor does he have the bend you need to beat tackles, quality tackles around the edge and shorten that corner and get to the quarterback. He plays differently when he's tired. Like, that's not really saying much. Most guys don't play the same when they're tired, but he seems to look a little bit more sluggish than most when he's tired. Now, I will defend him and say this guy played over 90% of snaps for Florida State defensively, so he's not coming off the field very often. So you can never tell when you're watching tape. It's hard to really put together what juncture of the game it is. Is this the 12th play of a drive? Was it a 3-and-out by the offense that put them right back on the field after they just came off the field from a 9-play drive? It's hard to really internalize all of those things, but you can tell that he was a guy that gave everything he had, but when he was tired, he's a different football player. Again, not saying much, but the drop-off is so steep from when he's fresh and energized to when he's tired that it's very noticeable. And then finally, he lacks the bend to be an elite edge rusher. I've already mentioned that, so I'm not going to harp on that any longer. But this is a guy that I think has the chance to be one of the biggest difference makers, sort of like what we saw from Justin Houston, a third-round pick out of Georgia that no one really was talking about back way when he was selected by the Chiefs. Ends up being one of the better pass rushers we have in this league. DeMarcus Walker, I think, is going to be one of those hidden gems from this draft. When we look back 5-6 years down the road, he's going to be a guy that we say, wow, the Broncos stole him in the second round, 51st pick overall, Florida State edge rusher, DeMarcus Walker for me is hit hard. He's hit deep. You can put him on the board. Yes. It's another home run. Back-to-back jacks for the Denver Broncos in the first 2 rounds of the 2017 NFL Draft. As we go to their third round selection, another pick that I think was an outstanding selection made by John Elway and company. Third round, 82nd pick overall. La Tech wide receiver Carlos Henderson is the selection. This is a guy that I just had fun watching his tape. Every year, there are certain guys that just stand out among the rest in terms of just having fun watching their tape. And Carlos Henderson was one of those guys for me this year. And the first pro, speed, pure unadulterated speed, 4.46. The acceleration is the next pro, so I'll lump those two together. He's one of those guys that runs like someone's chasing him. And not in the sense of football. Obviously, someone is chasing him. If he has the ball, they're trying to get to him. But I always remember Jerry Rice saying, on every time because Jerry Rice wasn't a speed demon. Jerry Rice didn't time well at the combine or in the workouts prior to him getting drafted by the 49ers. But Jerry Rice would always say, I ran fearful every time I had the football. And you could tell when Jerry Rice would catch that slant, Jerry Rice would turn into a different guy. There was another gear that he had access to that would allow him to run away from guys that you just didn't know he had just watching him. And I see the same thing with Carlos Henderson. When he gets the football, his head snaps back and he's running as fast as he humanly possibly can. And you can tell because there's another gear that he taps into and all of a sudden he starts running by guys like they're standing still. And there's an acceleration that allows him to be dynamic, not only as a receiver, but as a return man as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but he's a yakster. They love to get him the football out in space at La Tech, whether it was as a running back or on jet sweeps or with hitches, with wide receiver screens, slants, anything that they could get him isolated with the football away from defenders so that he could get a running start. They would do it at La Tech and he would excel when he had the football out in space. He has the most ridiculous agility of anyone in this draft. There is another guy, I think he went to North Carolina A&T, Tariq Cohen, who is ridiculous in terms of agility. So those two are neck and neck for me in this draft. But Carlos Henderson's agility is off the charts. In tight quarters and spaces, he's able to make guys miss like nobody's business. And he'll take a 3-yard gain. There's a play, and I want to say it was against Western Kentucky in the championship game of their conference. And he catches the football on a hitch at like the 6-yard line. There are 3 Western Kentucky defenders right there. Someone's got to get him, right? You would think that at least someone would lay a hand on him. And he comes in, he catches the football, he takes 1 step backwards, 1 step forward, and then darts into the end zone and leaves all 3 of those Western Kentucky defenders in his wake. It is just so quick. It is so stunning. And he's the type of guy that I always marvel at, like a Marshall Faulk, where they don't have to break stride to make sharp cuts. They do it seamlessly within the flow and rhythm of them running. And because of that, it makes them that much more dangerous when they have the football and they're running at you. This guy has great hands. I saw him leap and leave his frame from a guy that's 5'11". You don't see this very often. This guy's jumping up in the air and going and collecting the football 3-4 inches away from his frame. You're talking about or 2 or 3 feet away from his frame. You're talking about a guy that's going out in traffic nonetheless and collecting the football, knowing he's going to take a shot. It's impressive to watch him go up and get some of these footballs. He plays a lot bigger than his size. That's the next pro. When you see this guy go up for the football in traffic, collect the ball, knowing that contact is coming, it's something to behold. He uses his body well to shield himself and the football away from defenders. So again, he does a good job of really collecting the football away from his frame, using his hands and playing bigger than his size, because he will catch it in traffic. He's a big play threat guy, whether it's special teams, offensively. Yeah, this guy averaged 18.7 yards per catch in 2016. And again, normally when you hear a number like that, okay, he's catching a bunch of deep balls. Quite the contrary with this man here in Carlos Henderson. A lot of underneath stuff where he's making guys miss and getting yards after the catch. So he's a big play threat. He can and will run by DBs who are flat-footed, but he did a lot of his damage underneath and then making something happen after the catch. He's versatile, okay? A guy that I saw him line up in the backfield. They would do so many creative things with him at La Tech because they just wanted to get him out in space. They line him up in the backfield. They send him in motion, jet sweeps, outside, out wide, in the slot, you name it, he basically did it at La Tech. And so this guy's extremely versatile, not to mention what you got out of him on special teams, which we'll get to a little bit later on. Heavy production at La Tech at the receiver position last year, 82 catches, 1,535 yards, 19 touchdowns. So this guy was extremely productive, all the while handling the primary duty of returning kickoffs and sprinkling in some punts. So this is a guy that was extraordinary. And speaking of which, special teams value, 2 punt returns for touchdowns. This is a guy that also returned kickoffs and averaged over 30 yards a kickoff return. So this guy was just extraordinary for La Tech and did everything to help them win games and give them an opportunity to win their conference in 2016. As we go to his cons, his size, he's 5'11", 199. That's not bad size. It's just not top-notch NFL wide receiver size. Nonetheless, he plays bigger than 5'11". He plays like a guy that's 6'1", 6'2". 200 pounds, that's not a bad size for a 5'11 guy. So he has the physical build to be able to withstand the NFL punishment that may come his way as a shifty runner. That being said, he has inconsistent play speed. He's one of those guys that if he knows the football is not supposed to come to him, he's not giving you maximum effort. He's not running his route with the same persistence of a guy that is probably going to get the football on a particular play. So he kind of gives that away, and that's something he's going to have to clean up. He's going to have to be more even-keeled in terms of his performance, play speed. I'm going to need him to be consistent with that. Play in, play out, whether you're getting it or you're not getting it, whether you're a decoy or you're the main option on that route. Need you to run hard. Sometimes he'll gear it down on routes a little bit sooner than he needs to. The play speed isn't consistent, and that's something that he's going to have to work on. And I take it a step further. The last con, he's an undeveloped route runner. I think a lot of that has just to do with the La Tech offense and what they asked him to do because he was such a dynamic player. They didn't ask him to run a bunch of complex routes. They basically said, look, man, we just want to get you the football. And whether that's a curl, whether that's a stop, whether that's a hitch, whether that's a jet sweep, whether that's a toss out of the backfield, whatever. Okay, we want you to have the football because you're such a dynamic player for us. Don't worry about running routes crisply or at the right depth. None of that stuff. Just go out and we'll get you the football. And so I think there's some things that he's going to have to clean up at the next level as a route runner to take it to that next level. But I think this is the perfect pick for a Broncos team that I think could use a shot in the arm on special teams. And they got 2 guys that's going to give them an opportunity to do that. And then I think they could use some help at receiver. When Emmanuel Sanders would go down, this team would struggle. When he would look like he was laboring, dealing with some injuries. When you had number 88, 88, Demaryius Thomas struggling, dropping footballs and not being himself, this offense would struggle. They could use an extra set of hands out there that can make plays. You were hoping that would be the receiver you took out of Indiana a couple of years ago. Hasn't really panned out. This is a guy that I think can come in and help you in more than one way. In the 3rd round, 82nd pick overall, La Tech wide receiver Carlos Henderson for me is a triple. Love this selection. by John Elway and company, and I think he's a guy that's going to come in and have an impact. May not be the hugest impact. He may not come in and have an Odell Beckham type of season. Don't expect that from him. He's not a number 1 nor a number 2 on this Denver Broncos roster, but it wouldn't shock me in the least if this guy's getting the football as a third option on this football team and making his presence felt sooner rather than later. You go to the next third round selection for the Broncos, and this is a selection that I wasn't as in love with. As a matter of fact, of all the picks in this draft, this is the one that I don't like the most. 101st overall, Lamar cornerback Brendan Langley is the selection. Height, weight, speed specimen, 4'3" guy, standing 6 feet, right around 200 pounds. So this guy's got the requisite size you're looking for. He's got the height, he's got the speed, he can run. He's got some length on him, 32-inch arms. So he looks the part of an NFL cornerback, and I think the Broncos fell in love with the measurables. They fell in love with some of the things that he brings to the table. An ex-receiver, great hands, had 6 interceptions last year in the Big South Conference. But nonetheless, this is a guy that is extremely raw because he's an ex-receiver. We'll talk about that. He's strong, 22 reps of 2 1/4. So again, he looks the part getting off the bus, but that play strength doesn't really transfer to me because he's not as aggressive in the run game as I would like him to be. You that strong, you should be manhandling receivers and getting to ball carriers, and that's just not the case. But he does offer you some special teams value. Again, another and a theme you'll see with this Broncos draft. Henderson gives you some special teams value. Langley gives you special teams value. And another pick later on in the draft at the receiver position gives you more special teams value. So that's a common thread with a lot of these offensive and some, to a certain extent, defensive players. They give you a little bit of flexibility in the realm of special teams. But from those pros, you go to Langley's cons. He's still transitioning from wide receiver. Now, you could look at that as a pro or a con. I choose to look at it as a con just because I don't know how much better he's going to get. I look at him. I look at some of his mannerisms. I look at the way that he plays and approaches the game. I think he's a little soft. I think he plays the game with a finesse, a sort of a tendency, which is a stark contrast to what the Broncos do with Roby. With Aqib Talib, who's getting up there in age, obviously, with Chris Harris Jr. These are all physical guys that get in your face, they molest you. You don't get that from Brendan Langley. I think he's more of a finesse corner. But he's got the physical build to become a much more aggressive corner. I just don't see that coming from him. He plays the cornerback position like a receiver. That's a problem because receivers, again, generally, they're not looking for contact, and I don't think Brendan Langley is looking for much contact as a cornerback. Level of competition, I'm not going to harp on that. He played in the Big South. Look, it wasn't the best competition in the world, obviously, but when you're at Lamar, this is a guy that was at Georgia initially, so it's not like he went straight to Lamar and hasn't seen that level of competition. He went to Georgia, wasn't getting the playing time that he thought he deserved, moved on to Lamar, and the rest is history. But nonetheless, level of competition, we'll see how he does going to the next level. Yeah, he got 6 picks at Lamar, against Coastal Carolina and the likes. But what happens when now you're playing at a much higher level against better and stiffer competition? We'll see what happens. And I would love him to be more aggressive in the run game. I don't think he's a very aggressive run defender. I think he allows guys to block him too easily. I think he allows the action to be taken to him instead of him taking the action in the fight to the receiver and getting to the ball carrier. So again, these are all things that they probably can be approved upon, but I just don't see it. I didn't see it, especially in the 3rd round. I thought this was a guy that you could have taken in the 4th, possibly even as late as the 5th round. Someone was going to fall in love with his measurables and his ball skills, and that team turned out to be the Denver Broncos in the 3rd round, 101st pick overall. Lamar cornerback Brendan Langley for me is a double. I think this was a little too high for him. But again, who am I to say? He's got all of the measurables, all of the tools you need to have a really good corner here. We'll see if they're able to develop him like they've done in Denver. with a lot of their cornerbacks over the years. As we move on to the 5th round now, 2 5th-round selections, the first of which, 145th pick overall, Michigan tight end Jake Butt is the selection. Now, I love this selection because of the value here. Jake Butt is a 2nd round, at worst a 3rd round tight end. Really, to me, 2nd round tight end. He would have been off the board had he been healthy. Jake Butt is gone off the board in the 2nd round, but because of the injury that he sustained in his team's bowl game, not knowing the status of when he would be available, teams kind of said, you know what, we're not going to mess around with Jake Butt. He wasn't a great athlete to begin with. Now you're dealing with an ACL. We'll pass. Broncos said, hey, your loss is our gain. We'll take him in the 5th round, get some great value in the process. And so 6'5", 246, great NFL tight end size. That's where we start with his pros. That's exactly the kind of build you're looking for. Yeah, maybe it would have been better if he was 252, 255 pounds, but at his size, at 6'5", 246 pounds, more than enough size to get it done at this level. He's got great hands. That's probably the most reliable thing with him right now is his hands. You know, if you throw it to him, he's going to catch it. And I think he's got the ability to get better as he gets into the league, gets some coaching, learns the nuances of the position of tight end and how to get away with some things. I think he's already learned some of those things in the college game, which takes me to my next pro, deceptive and savvy route runner. He's one of those guys that at the stem of his route has that little lean in and push off with the elbow to create separation. And he knows how to do those little slick things. He'll sit down in zones, and then he'll kind of wander away from the defender, giving his quarterback an easy, inviting target to throw the football to. He does all of the little things that will allow him to live in this NFL for the next decade. To me, he has an eerily similar feel to Jason Witten. And if he can put on a little bit of weight and be a better run blocker, he can have himself a damn good NFL career for years to come. Reliable chain mover is the next pro. At Michigan, he was his quarterback's favorite target, especially in early down and distances. And that would put them in 3rd down situations that were short and convertible, in which he would also look for Jake Butt and move the sticks. And this is the type of guy that, no, he's not going to wow you with his ability to stretch the field. We know how the NFL is evolving at the tight end position. Everyone's looking for their Travis Kelce, their Jordan Reed, their Rob Gronkowski. So now guys like Evan Ingram and O.J. Howard are going in the 1st round because they're speed demons. They can run. They're big. They offer you that mismatch ability like a Gerald Everett who went off the board in the 2nd round to the Rams. Jake Butt isn't any of those types of guys in terms of athleticism, but what he is a guy that will catch the football on 3rd and 4, will catch the football on 3rd and 7. No, he's not going to win all the time against a linebacker on a seam route, but yes, he will separate on that out route. Yes, he will separate on a stop route over the middle. Yes, he will get open on a corner route. Yes, he will nudge off at the stem of that corner route and create the separation and an easy target for the quarterback and pick up 13 or 17 yards. He's a reliable target, a guy that you can get the football to and feel comfortable getting the football to on a consistent basis. He's a yakster. When he catches the football, no, he's not going to make you miss. He's not going to juke the draws off of anybody, but he is going to turn up the field, be tough with the football, and get every single yard that is available to him after the catch. Formational flexibility is the next pro. This is a guy that they moved around at Michigan, and I anticipate that the Broncos will do the same exact thing with him when he is in fact healthy and ready to go. Right now, he's supposed to be ahead of schedule as far as his injury goes, and we'll talk about his injury a little bit later on. But this is a guy that they put at fullback. They put him at H-back. They moved him around the line of scrimmage. He pulled. They did a lot of things. They flexed him out. Formational flexibility is what you generally get from college tight ends, and Jake Butt is no different. He competes in the run game. Now, he's got a long way to go as a blocker, but one thing's for certain, he's willing to go and do the work. He's willing to put in the work, get his hands dirty, and try to be a guy that will get it done in the run game. But he struggles. He takes some poor angles. He's very grabby. There's a lot of things he's going to have to clean up. But again, he's giving the effort. And any coach will tell you, give me the guy that's going to try, that's going to give me the effort. I can work with him. I can mold him. And I think Jake Butt gives that impression off as a guy that is willing to work in the run game. We go from his pros to his cons. He's grabby and takes questionable angles in the run game. And really, to me, those two go hand in hand. Because he takes questionable angles to get to the guy that he's supposed to be blocking, he then becomes grabby. Because and I said this about Garrett Bowles earlier in the draft, because you take a poor angle and you go where the guy is instead of where he's going, that guy all of a sudden darts ahead of you because you go where he is, he takes off. Now you're not in a good position. Your feet are in one space, your hands and your body are in another. Next thing you know, you're lunging, you're grabbing, and you're holding, and that's how you get yourself into trouble. If he takes better angles, there are times where you see him come through the hole and flatten a guy or contact a guy and make that kick out block. He can do that because it's head on. But when he's asked to go at an angle, he struggles because he takes poor angles. So I think if he takes better angles, he'll be better and he'll be less grabby in the run game. And then he's an average athlete. No, he's not going to. And he didn't run at the combine, obviously, because of the last tore his ACL in the bowl game versus Florida State. But nonetheless, this is a guy that he wasn't going to wow us at the combine with his 40 time, but he's fast enough. He's a good enough athlete. And I've been saying this for years. Jason Witten will beat no one in a foot race other than offensive linemen in the National Football League. However, and some of them, he won't even beat them. But somehow, some way, he always finds himself open, and I feel the same way about Jake Butt. I think he's a better athlete than Jason Witten, no doubt about it now. But when Witten first came in the league, he wasn't a slug then. As he got older, he got slower. I think Jake Butt is a guy that can move around well enough, but he's no O.J. Howard, he's no Evan Ingram, he's no Gerald Everett, and that's why he finds himself, along with the injury, in the 5th round. But I love this selection. I think it's a great pick. You've got an athlete in Hireman that you got out of Ohio State that tore his ACL in camp when you drafted him as a rookie. I think if you can get Jeff Hireman healthy and Jake Butt all of a sudden comes along and he's healthy, you can have yourself a hell of a 1-2 punch at the tight end position. 5th round, 145th pick overall. Michigan tight end Jake Butt, for me, is a triple. Love this selection. Love the value. Love the dependability of the player you're selecting here in the 5th round. You go to the next 5th round pick, 172nd pick overall. Georgia wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie is the selection. Pure unadulterated speed is the first pro. 4.42 240 for Isaiah McKenzie. He can pick him up, put him down. Another one of these guys with uber acceleration. That's the next pro. He just flat out runs away from people. He's a short, diminutive guy. And when he turns on the burners, you can tell he's moving at a very rapid rate. He's a yakster, another one of these guys that at Georgia, they just were looking to get him the football in any way, shape, form possible as quickly as they could because he's dynamic with the football in hand, in space. And so he's a guy, not necessarily like a Carlos Henderson making guys miss, but he's one of those guys, 1 or 2 cuts up the field he goes and he's trying to run away from defenders. Big play ability, average about 12 yards or so per touch. This is not just offensively. We're talking all around rushes. We're talking special teams. We're talking, or really from an offensive standpoint. I take that back. We're talking about offensive touch. We're talking about 12 yards in offensive touch. Just think about that for a second. This is a guy that touched it on jet sweeps and out of the backfield a little bit and also caught the football. And you're talking about every single time he touched it over the last 3 years, he was getting about 12 yards a touch. That's phenomenal, okay? You're talking about a first down and then some every time this guy touches the football, so that tells you just how dynamic he was with the ball in his hands. He's a versatile guy. They would line him up in the slot primarily at Georgia, but he would go with jet sweeps. They'd run him up the seam. His biggest game to me in terms of big playmaking ability was in that Vandy game, which was a coming of age game for freshman quarterback Jacob Eason, where he takes him down the field on that final drive versus Vandy on the road, or excuse me, versus Mizzou on the road. And finds Isaiah McKenzie for the touchdown to go ahead score in that ball game. And so they use him on seams. They use him on jet sweeps. They use him on screens. They just want to get the football in his hands as quickly as possible. And then finally, special teams value. This is a guy that had 6 return touchdowns in his career at Georgia, 5 of them via punt returns, the last a kick return. So This is a guy that gives you a value special teams day one. I don't know if he's ready to have an impact as a wide receiver quite yet. Carlos Henderson, I think, is in a much better position to help you as a receiver. McKenzie is in a much better spot to help you as a return man. And I think he's going to come in and lock that down if he's healthy in camp. As we go on to his cons, his size, obviously 5'7", 173. That's not ideal size. And you can get away with that if you're an exceptional route runner in the slot, which McKenzie is not. Taking me to my next con, he lacks true slot polish. And what I mean by that is his routes aren't crisp for a guy his size. Normally, guys that are 5'7", 173, they're in and out of breaks quickly. They're juking guys. They're creating space and separation due to their route running ability and their quickness and shiftiness out in space. Isaiah McKenzie, not so much. Okay, that's why they ran a lot of seam routes with him. That's why they did a lot of things to get him the football quickly. And when he wasn't running a screen or a jet sweep, it was a seam route or something vertical, because on the crossers and the things that you would expect a guy of his stature to win against, he just wasn't as fluid in those types of situations. So they would much rather run him vertically than run him across the field. And so he struggles from a slot perspective. And that's why I think he's going to be able to help this team more so in a special teams capacity than as a wide receiver. Then finally, he's a body catcher. He'd much rather catch the football with his body, with his forearms, than actually with his hands. So again, I think Carlos Henderson, even though he can provide you with some pop on special teams as well, Isaiah McKenzie's primary goal to make this Broncos roster, I think his focus is going to be driven by special teams. Now, he's going to try to do everything he can as a receiver, because the more you do, the more likely it is you make the roster. But if he's going to make this team, I think it's going to be because of his special teams prowess. And in the 5th round, 172nd pick overall, Georgia wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie for me is a double. I think he comes in and gives the Broncos a shot in the arm on special teams. And I think he, along with Carlos Henderson and even Brandon Langley, are all guys that give you value on special teams. As we go to your next selection, 6th round, 203rd pick overall, Coastal Carolina running back D'Angelo Henderson is the selection. This is a guy that reminds me so much of MJD. All right. His build and speed are his first pros. That MJD build, you can get away with that when you're thick. Without or throughout, I should say. He's got that thick bowling ball type of frame at 5'7", 4'4", 840 now. That's not Mojo speed there. Mojo came into the league running a sub 4'4". Okay, he was in the 4'3", 9, 4'3", 8 range, somewhere in there, if I can recall that correctly. So he's not quite there in terms of the speed, but 4'4", 8 at that size, that's phenomenal speed for a guy the size of D'Angelo Henderson. He's a bulldozer, man. That's the next pro. This is a guy that with that acceleration, and that's also another pro, so we'll lump those together. That acceleration at that size with his pad level being lower than most, going that fast, he's got the ability, and he's not afraid to run behind his pads, lower those pads, and absolutely dump truck a defender. The best memory I have of him doing this, I watched him against Florida A&M in a game where he scored like 5 touchdowns, and I kid you not, he literally scored like 5 touchdowns. They scored like 49 points in that game, and I think he accounted for at least 4, if not 5 touchdowns. And probably the most back-breaking of those touchdowns was when he took a carry, went right up the middle, a safety came over, thought he was gonna stop him right around the 3 or 4 yard line, and D'Angelo Henderson lowers his shoulders and absolutely plows this guy without breaking stride on his way to the end zone. It was a thing of beauty and so embarrassing for that defender. But that's what this guy can do. He's already low to the ground, lower center of gravity than most defenders. So he's already got that advantage there. He lowers the pads, and if you don't come correct, you will get flattened. And so he's got that ability to be a bulldozer at the next level. He can catch the football. He's a pass catcher as well. And I'll talk about his stats and what he was able to kind of comprise over his career at Coastal Carolina, where he was exceptional. He was their offense in a nutshell, and not only was he a rock toter, but he could also catch it out of the backfield. He's a yakster. Talked about him getting yards after contact. Talked about him running over guys. He's a guy that can also make you miss. Doesn't do it as often as I would like to see him do it, but I've seen him do it enough to know that he possesses the ability to do it. I'm not going to be shocked if he makes this Broncos roster. And we already know Devontae Booker hasn't been able to stay healthy since he joined this Broncos team. He's already out for the first, what are we talking? 4 to 6 weeks of camp, maybe even leaking into the beginning of the season. It wouldn't shock me at all if D'Angelo Henderson not only made this roster, but ended up seeing some legitimate touches early in the season, because this is a guy that I think has a feel for running the rock, and has a lot of things that you look for in a productive back. Not saying that he's a guy that you want to give it to 25 times at the next level, but I think he's a guy that can see some touches and may be able to help the Broncos in the run game. Has a nose for the end zone, set an NCAA Division I record for consecutive games with a touchdown, 35 straight games with at least a touchdown. Fell 3 short of Danny Woodhead's college football, irregardless of division record of 38 consecutive games with a touchdown, but 35 in itself is a big accomplishment. And this is a guy that just finds the end zone time and time again. Heavy collegiate production. This is a guy that amassed a ton of yardage, and this is just over the last 3 years. This is not even counting his redshirt freshman season. I'm just talking about the last 3 years while at Coastal Carolina. This is what he did on the ground. 639 carries, 4,036 yards, and 52 rushing touchdowns. That's just on the ground. In the air, another 93 grabs in that same time frame for 882 yards and an additional 6 touchdowns. You're talking about a guy that over the life of his career amassed over 60 touchdowns, close to 70 career touchdowns. This is a guy that just was outstanding at Coastal Carolina. The other team knew he was getting the ball and still could not stop D'Angelo Henderson. As we go to his cons, his size, 5'7", 208 pounds. Tough to make a living in this league at that size, but we've seen guys do it. My favorite comp, MJD for him, to me, is why this guy can make it and thrive in this league if he takes care of his body. So we'll see what he's able to do there. But his size, again, not ideal, but we'll see what happens. Predetermines his cuts at times. I think he predetermines pre-snap. Okay, this is where I want to go with the football. And instead of him setting up, I think as a running back, if you want to excel, it is your job to allow the play and the rhythm of the play and what your blockers do to really determine where you go with the football. You can't just predetermine, all right, this is my track, so I'm going to stay on my track. And at some point, I'm going to stick my foot in the ground and I'm just going to barrel into somebody. And sometimes you got to let things develop. And if your blocker gives you an avenue, you cut off of his block. Maybe you press something and then it opens up backside and then you're able to see it and you cut it all the way backside. I think sometimes he just says, okay, I'm going here, whether it's there or not, and I'm getting whatever I can get. I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to get what I can get. And so sometimes I think he predetermines where he's going with the football when he's running in between the tackles. And then last but not least, level of competition. He played in the Big South. He was in the FCS, same conference as your corner that you took earlier in the draft, Brandon Langley, that played at Lamar. So small competition, smaller school, but it doesn't matter. You know, those types of numbers are dominant numbers any way you slice them. And so I'm not going to harp on that. All I ask when you go to a small school is that you dominate the level of competition. He did that. I don't have any complaints. In the 6th round, 203rd overall selection, Coastal Carolina running back D'Angelo Henderson, for me, is a double. I think this is a guy that's going to come in, compete, and would not shock me if he not only made this Broncos roster, but actually got some touches early in the season. As we go to the final pick in this draft, and an intriguing one at that, 7th round, Mr. Irrelevant, 253rd, the final pick of the 2017 NFL Draft, Ole Miss quarterback Chad Kelly is the selection. Arm talent is the first thing that jumps off the screen with me with Chad Kelly. The guy can throw it anywhere on the football field and throw it with ease. His arm is a blessing. It's also something that can get him into trouble. It's a gift and a curse, as it usually is for big armed quarterbacks, but nonetheless, you'd much rather have it than not have it. He has it in spades. Athleticism and toughness. I don't think he gets enough credit for his athleticism. Now, you're talking about a man who's torn his ACL now 2 times. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But nonetheless, the guy can move, all right? He can run, and you used to see him do so at Ole Miss. He's a tough guy. You don't always want your quarterback taking hits, but he was a guy that was willing to put his body on the line for the good of the team. And so he's a tough guy. He'll stare down the gun barrel, take a shot, deliver the football. There's toughness and an athleticism element to his game that I think goes under the radar because of his arm talent. He's got a gunslinger mentality. There are throws, and you know, with all gunslingers, there's good and there's the bad. You have to take it with a grain of salt. But at his best, there are some throws that you see him make that are just breathtaking, that you see him perform and you say, that's an NFL throw. Wow. Okay. There's a throw versus Alabama to Stringfellow where he splits the safety who's coming over just a tad bit late and the corner who's trailing on the play in a window that is so tight and tiny that even thinking about throwing this football was risky in itself. But to get it there on the move, reset the feet, stop, plant, and deliver it down the sideline, that's an NFL A1 throw, if I may say so myself. There's a throw in the first game to Evan Ingram on a seam route for a touchdown when they were up big on Florida State, routing them early in that ball game. Phenomenal throw. NFL caliber anticipation and timing right in a window where you couldn't even see it. They gave us a beautiful shot from the view of the quarterback as he's throwing a football, and to see what he saw and to have the anticipation that he had and throw it through the window that he did to Evan Ingram was an outstanding throw. It's those types of throws that says, look, this guy can play in this league. And then there are the mistakes that follow because of that big arm and because of some of the faulty decision making that he has. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But that gunslinger mentality, it's a gift, it's a curse, but when he's on, he is dynamite. He can throw on the move and then also reset his feet and throw the football accurately as well. So when he's on the move, bootlegs and things of that nature, getting to the outs, he can throw it on the move accurately. He can reset his feet, just like I talked about with that throw versus Bama to Stringfellow down the sideline. It was initially ruled a touchdown, ended up coming back to the 1-yard line. He's got that kind of ability to outside the pocket, reshuffle his feet, pressure may come, reshuffle the feet, and deliver the football down the field. He does that as well as anyone in college football. Does a really good job of using, and again, that athleticism, I come back to that. It's underrated for Chad Kelly. We don't know what that athleticism is going to look like after his second ACL tear, but nonetheless, he is an athletic guy. At least he was pre-ACL tear for the second time. And finally, competitiveness. This is a guy that came from a JUCO after winning a national championship there with that JUCO, comes to Ole Miss, beats Alabama, LSU, and Auburn all in the same year, which was the first time it ever happened in Ole Miss school history. And then the next year comes out. And if you want to see Chad Kelly at his best, the bowl game in that season versus Oklahoma State, that was a show. That was a clinic put on by everyone involved. That was Laramie Tunsil's coming out party. Everyone knew about Laramie Tunsil, but that was a perfect exclamation mark. Same can be said for Laquan Treadwell. Perfect exclamation mark to those guys' careers at Ole Miss. And it was Chad Kelly, to me, at his best, which had everyone clamoring for what he would do in his senior season. And it kind of fell short of all the expectations. They had opportunities, though. They were up big on Florida State, blew that lead. They were up big on Alabama, blew that lead. They had opportunities to have a huge season, and they just didn't get it done at Ole Miss in 2016. But he's a very competitive guy. His brother got hit late out of bounds in a high school game. He comes running off out of the stands. He's a competitive guy. Maybe that doesn't have as much to do with competitiveness, but I want that kind of guy on my team. Is he a little bit of a head case? Sure. But I want that kind of guy on my team that will lay his body out on the line and be competitive. That's Chad Kelly in a nutshell. So I'm giving you all the good. Now we got to talk about some of the bad and why this guy's a 7th round pick instead of a 3rd or 4th or a 2nd round pick. He's prone to mistakes on the field as well as off the field. You're talking about a guy that in the Alabama game, I talked about how they were up big in that game and blew that lead. He had 2 catastrophic fumbles in that game that helped stem the tide and ultimately turn it into an Alabama rout late in that game. He had some critical interceptions in a game against Florida State where they were up big early in that game. He had some really bad mistakes and interceptions in that game that allowed Florida State to not only come back, but much like the Alabama game, lose the game comfortably. He's a guy that will make mistakes. He'll make the big plays, the big throws. And then after halftime, and what we've seen with a lot of these games with him is teams will make halftime adjustments and he won't adjust to the halftime adjustments, and he struggles in the second half of games. Off the field, he got into some trouble, got into a fight in a bar. I talked about the altercation of him running out of the stands when his brother took a hit on the football field late out of bounds. This is a guy that got into it with coaching staff members at Clemson, which led to his dismissal from the university. So this is a guy with a sketchy background that you just don't know if you can trust as the guy to lead your football team. Lack of experience in a pro-style offense is another con. Look, he plays in a spread. That's the norm in college football for a lot of these quarterbacks. Took a few snaps under center, not many, but most of his snaps came from shotgun or the pistol. So you're talking about a guy that doesn't have the footwork down pat. And he's definitely a guy that would have to rework his footwork because it's not the best. Again, that's usually one of the problems with strong arm quarterbacks is their footwork is a mess because they rely so heavily on the strength of their arm. And then finally, he tore his ACL in 2013 when he was a member of the Clemson Tigers, tore it again in 2016 and missed the second part of the season with Ole Miss. So you're talking about a guy that has torn his ACL not once but twice. So that is something that needs to be taken into consideration as well. That's on the Carfax. So Chad Kelly has a lot of baggage, but there's a lot of talent there as well. Another guy late in the draft that would not shock me if he made this Broncos team as a 3rd string quarterback. 7th round, 253rd pick overall. Ole Miss quarterback Chad Kelly, for me, is a double to round out the Denver Broncos 2017 NFL draft. I thought it was a stellar job by John Elway and company of getting all of this talented football players in one haul. And you take some risk on some guys coming off of injuries. I love when teams do that, especially where they did it at. The only selection I'm not in love with is the Brendan Langley selection in the 3rd round. Felt like you could have gotten him a little bit later. And I thought there were other corners still on the board at that point in the draft that were better than him. But in any event, I love this draft. Let's take a look at their scoring quickly. A couple of home runs to start the draft. A couple of triples mixed in there with Henderson and Butt. You finish up the rest of the draft, all doubles, 4 of them to be exact. You get 2 doubles bonuses there. You get a tally up of those numbers and you get 26. You divide by the number of selections, 8 for the Broncos, and it's a 3.25 triple for the Denver Broncos in the 2017 NFL draft wrap up. Tremendous haul for the Broncos. I think they did an awesome job of restocking the cupboard. We'll see how these players pan out for them moving forward. That's going to do it for your man Louie T here on the Draft Wrap-Up series. That happens in the National Football League, whether big or small. We cover it all here on the Louie T Network. Come back and join me to continue to break down anything. And now, in the National Football League, I got one question for you. As normal, who's next?